The snow had started falling 3 days before Christmas, gentle flakes that drifted down like powdered sugar through the mountain air. Emily had been driving through the Rockies, heading home to Seattle after a conference in Denver, when the weather reports began their urgent warnings. She'd pushed on anyway, confident in her rental SUV and her years of winter driving experience. That confidence lasted exactly 47 miles before the blizzard hit with a fury that transformed the world into a swirling white nightmare. She barely made it off the highway, following what she hoped was a road, when the vehicle lurched into a ditch. The engine died. Her phone showed no signal. For 20 terrifying minutes, she sat there as snow piled against the windows, wondering if this was how her story would end, alone and frozen at 32, just another cautionary tale about winter travel. Then, through the whiteout, she saw a light. A flashlight beam, cutting through the chaos. A figure emerged, bundled so completely she couldn't tell if they were human or Yeti, knocking on her window with mittened hands. She'd never been so grateful to see another person in her entire life. The man, she learned once they'd trudged through knee-deep snow to his cabin, was named Daniel. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe 35, with kind eyes and a beard that was more necessity than fashion statement up here in the mountains. He'd seen her headlights from his window and come out immediately, he explained, wrapping her in blankets by a roaring fireplace. No one should be out in this, he said. The storm was supposed to last at least 3 days. She'd barely processed this information, still shivering despite the warmth, when 2 small faces appeared around a doorframe. A boy and a girl, maybe 6 and 8 years old, staring at her with the unabashed curiosity only children possess. "These are my kids," Daniel said, a note of weary pride in his voice. "This is Mason and Sophie. Kids, this is Emily. She's going to be staying with us until the storm passes." The children looked at each other, something passing between them that Emily couldn't quite read. Then Sophie stepped forward, solemn as a judge, and said, "Do you like hot chocolate? Because we make really good hot chocolate. Papa taught us the secret ingredient." That first night passed in a strange blur of exhaustion and adjustment. The cabin was small but warm, all wood and stone and the kind of cozy that only comes from a place that's truly loved. Daniel gave her his room, insisting he'd take the couch, and she was too tired to argue much. She fell asleep to the sound of wind howling outside and the murmur of Daniel reading his children a bedtime story in the next room. She woke on Christmas Eve to the smell of pancakes and the sound of children's laughter. The storm still raged outside, snow piling so high against the windows that the world seemed to have shrunk to just this cabin, just these 4 people. Daniel was in the kitchen, flipping pancakes while Sophie stood on a stool beside him, carefully measuring out chocolate chips. Mason was setting the table, his tongue poking out in concentration as he arranged the forks just so. "Morning," Daniel said when he noticed her in the doorway. "Hope you slept okay." Kids insisted on making breakfast for our guest. Over pancakes that were indeed delicious, the secret ingredient being cinnamon. As Sophie proudly revealed, Emily learned more about her unexpected hosts. Daniel was a writer, working on his 3rd novel, which explained the isolation. His wife, Sarah, had died 2 years ago in a car accident. He didn't say this directly, but Emily noticed how the children's eyes dropped when he mentioned her, how his voice caught just slightly on her name. They'd moved to the mountains afterward, needing space to heal, to rebuild themselves into this new configuration of family. "Do you have kids, Emily?" Mason asked, and Daniel quickly shushed him, but Emily shook her head, smiling. "No kids. No husband either. Just me and a cat named Professor Whiskers who my neighbor is looking after." "Professor Whiskers is the best name ever," Sophie declared with absolute authority. "Can we tell her about the surprise, Papa?" Daniel looked uncomfortable. "I don't think we should trouble Emily with that." But the children were insistent, and eventually the story came out. They'd been planning a special Christmas, their first really happy one since their mother died. Daniel had ordered presents weeks ago, they'd made decorations, Sophie had been practicing a song on her little keyboard to perform. But the storm had knocked out their power briefly 2 days ago, and when it came back, the internet was gone. No streaming movies, no video calls to grandparents, and worst of all, Daniel's publisher had been supposed to send the files for his book illustrations, done by the children, that were meant to be a surprise Christmas gift for them. Everything felt like it was falling apart again. Emily listened to all this, watched the way Daniel tried to stay upbeat for his kids while clearly struggling himself, saw how the children were trying to be brave. Something in her chest tightened and then loosened, like a knot she hadn't known she'd been carrying. "Well," she said, "we'll just have to make our own Christmas then, won't we?" She'd never been particularly crafty, had always been more comfortable with spreadsheets than construction paper, but desperation and determination are powerful motivators. She and Sophie raided the cabin's meager supply of art materials while Mason and Daniel dug out every blanket and pillow they owned. By evening, they transformed the living room into what Sophie declared was definitely the North Pole, with paper snowflakes hanging from the ceiling and a fort made of quilts that served as Santa's workshop. Daniel pulled out his guitar, dusty from disuse, and they sang carols, some traditional and some completely made up on the spot. Mason's contribution was a song about a reindeer who ate too many cookies and couldn't fly, which had them all laughing until their sides hurt. Sophie performed her keyboard piece, a slightly wobbly but earnest rendition of Silent Night that left Daniel wiping his eyes and pretending it was just the firelight making them water. That night, after the children were in bed, Emily and Daniel sat by the fire, mugs of wine in their hands. "Thank you," Daniel said quietly. "For today. For making it special for them. I was worried I'd ruined Christmas by moving us out here, by being so far from everything." Emily shook her head. "They're happy, Daniel. Anyone can see that. You've built something good here." "Sarah used to handle Christmas," he admitted. "She was the one who made everything magical. I'm trying my best, but I don't always know if it's enough." "It's enough," Emily said firmly. "Being here, being present, loving them the way you clearly do, that's what matters. Trust me, I grew up with parents who gave me everything except their time and attention. Your kids are lucky." They talked for hours that night, sharing pieces of their lives. Emily told him about her career in corporate consulting, how successful and utterly empty it had started to feel. How she'd been driving home for Christmas to a family that would ask about her promotion but not about her happiness, to friends who knew her resume but not her dreams. Daniel talked about writing, about grief, about learning to be both mother and father to two heartbroken children while nursing his own shattered heart. On Christmas morning, they were woken by squeals of delight. The children had woken early and discovered that Emily had stayed up late making gifts. For Mason, a comic book she'd drawn about a superhero whose power was being really, really kind. For Sophie, a paper doll family with elaborate outfits Emily had painted with watercolors she'd found in a cupboard. They weren't professional or perfect, but they were made with care, and the children's joy was completely genuine. Daniel gave her a gift too, wrapped in newspaper comics. Inside was a leather bookmark he'd carved with her initials, something he'd apparently been working on during the evening after she'd gone to bed. "It must have been for someone else," she protested, but he shook his head. "Made it for you," he said simply. "For making our Christmas better than I could have hoped." The day unfolded with the lazy warmth of the best holidays. They played board games that got increasingly competitive. They cooked together, Emily's attempt at Yorkshire pudding ending in spectacular failure that had everyone crying with laughter. Mason taught her a card game with rules that seemed to change based on who was winning. Sophie insisted on giving everyone makeovers with the small makeup kit she'd gotten in her stocking, which resulted in Daniel sporting blue eyeshadow and glitter that he wore with surprising dignity. That evening, after a dinner of somewhat lopsided roast chicken and perfect roasted vegetables, they were all drowsy by the fire when Sophie climbed into Emily's lap. "I prayed for you," she said sleepily. "Last week, I prayed that God would send someone to help Papa be happy again. I didn't know you'd come for Christmas though. That was extra special." Emily's throat closed up. She looked at Daniel over Sophie's head and saw that he'd heard, saw something in his expression that made her heart skip. Later, after the children were asleep, they stood by the window watching the snow still falling, gentler now, the storm finally beginning to ease. "They're going to be heartbroken when you leave," Daniel said quietly. I'm going to be heartbroken when you leave. Emily took a breath. The truth was, she'd been thinking about this all day. About how she hadn't checked her work email once. About how she'd laughed more in 3 days than in the past 3 months. About how Sophie's hair smelled like strawberry shampoo when she hugged her goodnight, and how Mason's hand felt small and trusting in hers when they walked to look at icicles that afternoon. About how Daniel looked at her like she was someone worth knowing, not just worth having. What if I didn't leave? Not right away, at least. I have vacation time saved up. Mountains of it, actually. I could stay a while. Help out. Get to know the area. Daniel turned to face her fully. Are you serious? I don't know what I'm going back to, Emily admitted. A job that doesn't fulfill me. An apartment that's just a place to sleep. This is going to sound crazy. We've known each other 3 days, but I feel more at home here than I have in years. It doesn't sound crazy, Daniel said. Or maybe it does, but the good kind of crazy. The kind that makes sense even when it shouldn't. They stood there, snow falling outside, fire crackling behind them, the cabin warm and full of possibility. Emily thought about Sophie's prayer, about how sometimes the universe sends you exactly where you need to be, even if it takes a blizzard to get you there. When she kissed Daniel, it felt like coming home and starting an adventure all at once. 3 months later, Emily's stay had become permanent. She'd quit her job, sold most of her belongings, and moved into the cabin that now held her books on its shelves and Professor Whiskers on its sunny windowsill. She still consulted occasionally, now remotely for clients who valued her skills, but she'd also started helping Daniel with his work and had discovered a love for freelance editing. The children had stopped calling her Emily somewhere around week 2. Now she was just Em, said with the casual affection of family. She'd learned Mason's nightmares and Sophie's secret fears, how to braid hair and build elaborate Lego creations, when to push and when to just listen. She and Daniel took it slow, mindful of the children, careful with their healing hearts. But love, real love, doesn't rush because it knows it has time. They'd fallen into an easy rhythm of shared mornings and quiet evenings, of co-parenting and partnership, of building something new from broken pieces. On their first Easter together, Sophie said grace before dinner. She thanked God for the food, for her family, for chocolate eggs, and for answered prayers. I'm so glad you never left, she told Emily after, hugging her tight. You're the best Christmas present ever. Even better than the keyboard. Emily hugged her back, this child who'd prayed for someone to help her father heal, not knowing she'd heal Emily too. Sometimes, she thought, you get lost in a storm to find your way home. Sometimes family isn't what you're born into but what you choose, and what chooses you back. Outside, spring was melting the last of winter's snow. Inside, in a cabin that had once felt too empty and too full of grief, there was light and laughter and love, and 4 people who'd found each other when they needed it most.